Hey, dear survivors. I am Adrian Vargas. Subscribe now, because at 1,000 survivors, I'm unlocking a classified zombie outbreak case based on a real emergency broadcast. And trust me, this one was never meant for the public. Subscribe now, because in the next story, you'll decide what happens. The top comment from subscribers chooses the next survival route.
The magician was pulling a rabbit from a hat when I saw the woman across the street collapse. Nobody else noticed. 23 children were screaming with laughter in my backyard, their faces smeared with blue frosting. And my wife Elena was directing the caterer toward the dessert table, and the neighbors were clinking lemonade glasses in the shade of the big oak. And every single person in that yard was looking at the magician except me. I was standing near the side gate because I'd stepped away to check my phone. A work email. Something meaningless about a quarterly projection that doesn't exist anymore. And because I was facing the street instead of the yard, I saw Mrs. Langford walk out of her front door at 4200 Maple, take 4 steps down her porch, and fall face first into her lawn. She didn't put her hands out. She dropped the way a marionette drops when you cut every string at once. I almost went over. My hand was on the gate latch. But then her husband Don came out the front door and knelt beside her. And I thought, okay, he's got it. Maybe she fainted. The heat that day was brutal. 96 degrees in suburban Raleigh, the kind of July afternoon that makes the pavement shimmer. People faint. It happens. I went back to the party. My son, Lucas, turned 7 that day. He was sitting cross-legged in the front row, wearing a paper crown Elena had made, grinning so wide I could see the gap where he'd lost his second tooth. He looked at me and waved. I waved back. The magician produced a string of silk scarves from an empty box, and Daz and the children erupted again. "You okay?" Elena appeared beside me, touching my arm. Mrs. Langford just collapsed on her lawn. "Oh no. Is she all right?" "Don's with her." Elena nodded, already turning back toward the caterer. "He'll call 911 if he needs to. Can you grab more ice from the garage? We're running low." I grabbed the ice. I came back. I filled the cooler. I shook hands with Tom Reeves from 2 doors down and told him the burgers would be ready in 20 minutes. I did all the normal things. But something had lodged in my chest, not panic, not yet. Just a sliver of wrongness, like a splinter you can feel but can't see. The way Mrs. Langford fell. No stumble, no stagger. Vertical to horizontal in under a second. I pulled out my phone and opened the local news app. Nothing unusual. A warehouse fire in Durham. A school board meeting recap. A Brave score. By 3:15, the magician had packed up and the kids had migrated to the bounce house. I was manning the grill, flipping patties, when I noticed an ambulance parked in front of the Langford house. No sirens, no lights. Just parked there. Doors open, 2 EMTs moving without urgency. One of them was on his radio, and even from 50 yards away, I could tell from his posture that something was off. He kept looking up and down the street between transmissions, scanning. "Tom," I said, "you see that ambulance?" Tom glanced over his shoulder. Probably the heat. Marge Langford is what, 70? 75. 68. Same difference. Hand me a bun. I handed him a bun. I flipped another burger. I watched the ambulance. After 7 minutes, a second one arrived. Then a fire truck. No sirens on that one either. They were being quiet about it, whatever it was. And the quiet bothered me more than noise would have. Elena called from the patio. "Cake in 10 minutes. Can you get everyone rounded up?" I set down the spatula. I walked to the bounce house and started herding children toward the picnic tables. I counted heads the way I always do. Lucas, his best friend Wyatt, the Hernandez twins, Sophie from down the block. 23 children, all present, all sugar-fueled and grinning. I didn't know that in 3 hours, 4 of those children's parents would be dead. I didn't know that by midnight, Maple Street would be unrecognizable. I just knew the cake needed candles and my son deserved a perfect day. So I lit the candles. The cake was a dinosaur. Elena had spent 2 nights building it from stacked layers and green fondant, sculpting a brontosaurus with a long curving neck and tiny fondant eyes. Lucas gasped when he saw it. He put both hands on his cheeks like a movie kid and said, "Mom, it's the best cake in the whole universe." And Elena's face did that thing where she tries not to cry from happiness and almost fails. We sang. 23 kids and maybe 30 adults, all singing in the brutal afternoon heat, sweat beading on foreheads, paper plates wilting. Lucas blew out the candles in one breath. Everyone clapped. I took a photo. I still have that photo. It's the last picture I have of my family, where everyone is smiling. While Elena cut the cake, I drifted back toward the side gate. I told myself I was checking on the grill. That was a lie. I was checking on the Langfords. The ambulances were gone. The fire truck was gone. But the Langford house looked wrong. The front door was wide open, which Don would never allow. He was meticulous about air conditioning costs. And there was something on the porch, a stain, dark. I squinted. From this distance, it could have been anything. Spilled iced tea, potting soil. My phone buzzed. A push notification from WRAL News. Wake County Emergency Services responding to elevated call volume. Residents advised to stay hydrated and limit outdoor activity. That was a nothing statement, the kind of advisory they issue every heat wave. But the word elevated stuck with me. I opened the article. 4 paragraphs of standard heat warning language. Nothing about collapses. Nothing about the Langfords. I closed the app and went back to the party. "Daddy, look!" Lucas ran up to me holding a fistful of cake. His paper crown was tilted sideways. Sophie said dinosaurs aren't real anymore, but I told her they're real in museums. "That's exactly right, buddy." "Can we open presents now?" "In a few minutes. Go finish your cake." He sprinted off. I watched him rejoin the cluster of children at the picnic table, and I remember thinking, this is what it's all for. The overtime, the mortgage, the weekday grind. This, a 7-year-old in a crooked crown, running across a green lawn on a Saturday afternoon. This was the whole point. Tom Reeves found me again by the grill. He was holding his phone with an expression I hadn't seen on his face before. Tom was ex-military, Desert Storm, the kind of guy who told war stories at block parties with the casual ease of someone describing a fishing trip. Nothing rattled him. But something was rattling him now. "You got the Nextdoor app?" he asked. "Yeah." "Check it." I opened Nextdoor. The neighborhood feed, usually a slow trickle of lost cat posts and HOA complaints, had exploded. 14 new posts in the last hour. Did anyone else see the person walking strangely on Birchwood Lane? My neighbor hasn't responded to knocking in 6 hours. Her car is in the driveway. Something is wrong with the Petersons' dog. It attacked their mailman, and they can't get it back inside. 3 ambulances on Cedar Court. No sirens. Anyone know what's going on? I'm hearing noises from the Langford house, like moaning. Should I call someone? That last one was posted 12 minutes ago by Diane Cho, who lived directly next to the Langfords. I showed Tom. "That's weird," he said. but his voice had dropped half an octave the way it did when he was being serious. The no sirens thing. That's what gets me. When dispatch goes quiet, it usually means the system's overloaded or they don't want to draw attention. Draw attention to what? Tom didn't answer. He was reading another post, his thumb scrolling slowly. Then he locked his phone and looked at me with steady eyes. Probably nothing. But if I were you, I'd start wrapping up the party in the next 30 minutes. Get people headed home before dark. It was 4:45. Sunset was still 3 hours away. Before dark? Tom, it's not even 5. He shrugged. Call it instinct. I should have listened. Presents took 45 minutes. Lucas unwrapped each one with surgical patience, smoothing the paper, reading every card aloud, thanking each giver by name. Elena had taught him that. Manners first, even at 7. He got Legos, a remote control car, a set of watercolor paints, a book about space, and a stuffed triceratops that he immediately named Professor Stumps. By 5:30, parents were trickling out. The Hernandez family left. First, Maria mentioned something about her mother not feeling well across town. Then the Reeves family. Tom shook my hand at the gate and held it a beat too long. Lock up tonight, he said quietly. Tom, just do it. Humor an old soldier. Sophie's mom, Karen Atwell, lingered on the patio helping Elena clean up. She was a nurse at Wake Med, and her phone had been buzzing non-stop for the last hour. She kept glancing at it and putting it back in her pocket, her jaw tightening each time. Everything all right? I asked. ER's slammed, she said. They're calling in off-duty staff. Heather from triage just texted me. She said they've got people coming in with bites. Bites? Animal bites, she thinks. Or maybe human. She wasn't clear. Said a couple of patients got combative and had to be restrained. Karen forced a smile. Probably just the heat making everyone crazy. Sophie, baby, time to go. After Karen and Sophie left, the yard was finally quiet. Paper plates littered the grass. Deflated balloons drifted along the fence line. The bounce house wheezed softly as it deflated. Lucas was on the patio, building his new Lego set with the focus of a demolition expert, Professor Stumps propped beside him. Elena dropped into the lawn chair next to me and exhaled. That was a good one. It was. He's so happy. He is. She reached over and took my hand. What's wrong? You've been somewhere else all afternoon. I considered lying, considered saying work stuff or just tired, the way husbands do when they don't want to transfer their unease onto someone they love. But Elena had always been able to read me the way some people read weather, not the forecast, but the actual sky. Something happened across the street during the party. Mrs. Langford collapsed. Then there were ambulances. Now there are all these weird posts on Nextdoor about people acting strange, dogs attacking. People post crazy things on Nextdoor. Karen said the ER is flooded with bite victims. Elena was quiet for a moment. She looked across the yard toward the street. The Langford house was no longer visible from where we sat. But we could see the amber glow of the streetlight clicking on at the corner, earlier than usual. Or maybe it just seemed earlier because the sky had taken on a strange yellowish haze that didn't match the forecast. What are you saying? She asked. I don't know what I'm saying. I'm saying something feels off. Off like how? Off like Tom Reeves told me to lock up tonight. Tom, who I've never seen worried about anything more dangerous than a low fantasy football score. Elena studied me. Then she stood up. Okay. Let's get Lucas inside. We'll clean up the rest tomorrow. I'll lock the back. You get the front. No argument. No dismissal. That was Elena. She didn't need to understand the threat to respect the instinct. She moved with quiet efficiency, scooping up Lucas and his Legos and heading inside, and I followed behind, pulling the patio door shut and thumbing the lock. I walked through the house, checking windows. Front door locked, side door to the garage locked, basement windows latched. I pulled the curtains in the living room and paused at the front window, peering through the gap. Maple Street was empty. The Langford house was dark. No porch light, no interior light, nothing. Just a black rectangle where a home used to glow. And in the middle of the street, maybe 60 yards from my front door, a figure was standing motionless under the streetlight. Not walking, not looking around, just standing, arms at its sides, head tilted slightly forward, like a person mid-thought who had forgotten how to finish the thought. I watched for 90 seconds. The figure didn't move once. Not a muscle, not a sway. I closed the curtain. By 7 p.m., Lucas was in the bath, surrounded by foam dinosaurs and singing a song he'd invented about Professor Stomps going to space. I sat on the edge of the tub and pretended to listen while scrolling through my phone beneath the towel on my lap. I didn't want him to see the screen. The next door feed had become something else entirely. 62 new posts in the last 90 minutes. The tone had shifted from curious to frightened. There is someone standing in my backyard. They will not leave. I've called 911 3 times. No answer. Do not go to WakeMed. My husband went in for chest pain and we cannot reach him. The hospital is not answering phones. I can hear screaming from the direction of Briar Creek. Has anyone else heard this? Something is wrong. Something is really wrong. I clicked on the profile of the last poster, a woman named Grace Tillman, who lived on the next block. Her follow-up comment, posted 4 minutes later, consisted of a single sentence. They're in my house. No further posts after that. Daddy, watch this. Lucas submerged Professor Stomps and made explosion sounds. Amazing, buddy. Time to get out, okay? Prune fingers. I wrapped him in a towel and carried him to his room. He was asleep within 10 minutes of hitting the pillow, which was a miracle, usually birthday adrenaline. Kept him wired until 9. I kissed his forehead, turned on his nightlight, and pulled the door almost shut, leaving the 2-inch gap he always insisted on. Downstairs, Elena was at the kitchen island with her laptop open. The local news live stream was playing a desk anchor reading from a paper in his hands, visibly unsettled. Reports of civil disturbances across multiple Wake County neighborhoods. Emergency services are experiencing unprecedented call volume. The governor's office has issued a statement urging residents to remain indoors until further. The feed cut to static, then a holding screen, then nothing. Elena looked at me. It went down about a minute before you came in. That's the 3rd time it's dropped. I pulled a chair up beside her and opened my own laptop. Twitter was a cascade of fragmented panic, not just Raleigh, but Durham, Cary, Apex, Garner. Shaky videos of people running through parking lots. A clip from a gas station security camera showing a woman lunging at a clerk across a counter. A highway webcam showing Highway 40 at a complete standstill, headlights stretching to the horizon in both directions. This isn't a heat wave, I said. No, this is something else. Elena closed her laptop gently, the way she closed things when she was controlling her fear. I called my sister 30 minutes ago. She's in Fayetteville. She said it's happening there too. People acting erratic, violent, biting. She said her neighbor's teenage son walked into traffic and attacked a driver through an open window. Biting, I repeated. That's what she said. We sat with that word between us. It should have sounded absurd. It should have triggered the rational part of my brain that files things under impossible and moves on. But the feed of evidence was too dense, too convergent, too geographically spread to be coincidence or hysteria. My phone rang. The caller ID said Tom Reeves. Mark. His voice was low and controlled. You locked up? Yeah. Good. Listen to me carefully. I've got my scanner on. Police band is chaos. They've lost multiple officers to encounters. Dispatch just issued a code. I haven't heard since my service days. It's an advisory to abandon response protocol and prioritize self-preservation. Tom, what is that? It means the cops have been told to stop helping people and save themselves. That's what that means. Silence. I'm loading my truck, Tom continued. Brenda's packing bags. We're heading to her brother's farm in Sanford. It's rural, defensible. You should come. When? Now, right now. I looked at Elena. She'd heard every word Tom's voice carried. Lucas is asleep, she said. We'd have to wake him. We'd have to pack. We'd have to... I know. A sound interrupted us. Distant but unmistakable. A chorus of car alarms erupting in sequence down Maple Street like dominoes falling. One after another, moving closer. Tom, I'll call you back. I hung up. The car alarms lasted 11 minutes. I counted. I stood at the darkened living room window and counted because counting gave me something to do that wasn't panicking. Elena was upstairs checking on Lucas. I could hear her footsteps above me, careful, measured, the gait of a mother trying not to wake her child, while also trying not to scream. Through the curtain gap, I watched Maple Street transform. The figure under the streetlight was gone, but others had replaced it. 3 of them, moving down the sidewalk in a staggered line. Their movement was wrong, not the shambling Hollywood lurch I'd been conditioned to imagine, but something more unsettling. They walked with mechanical intent, each step landing flat-footed, arms barely swinging, heads fixed forward as if locked onto something I couldn't see. They moved like people whose bodies were being operated by something that had studied walking but hadn't perfected it. One of them stopped at the Hendersons' mailbox. It stood there for a full 30 seconds, then turned sharply 90 degrees, like a compass needle, and walked up the Hendersons' driveway. I heard glass break, faint, muffled. Then a scream, brief, high, cut short. I stepped back from the window. My hands were shaking. I clenched them into fists and pressed them against my thighs. Elena came downstairs. He's still asleep. What's happening? There are people outside, 3 of them. They just went into the Hendersons' house. The Hendersons? Jim and Patty? I heard a scream. Elena's face went through 3 expressions in 2 seconds. Disbelief, calculation, resolve. We need to go. Tom's plan, Sanford. Agreed. We moved in coordinated silence, the way parents learn to move during late-night infant crises. Deliberate, quiet, efficient. Elena went upstairs to pack essentials. Clothes for 3 days, medications, Lucas's inhaler, phone chargers, the envelope of cash we kept in the bedroom safe. I went to the garage. My hands found the camping supplies in the dark. 2 sleeping bags, a first aid kit, a box of protein bars, the water filter we'd bought for a hiking trip we never took. I loaded everything into the back of our SUV. Then I stood in the garage and did something I'd never done before. I took the baseball bat from the sports bin and set it on the passenger seat, back inside. Elena was at the top of the stairs with Lucas in her arms. He was half awake, blinking in confusion. Professor Stomps clutched against his chest. "Are we going somewhere?" he murmured. "Adventure trip," Elena whispered. "Go back to sleep." He closed his eyes, just like that. 7 years old, and his mother's voice was still the most powerful sedative on earth. My phone buzzed. A text from Tom. "Leaving in 5. Follow if you can. Route 1 south to 421. Avoid highways." I texted back. "Right behind you. 5 minutes." I didn't know if 5 minutes was realistic. I didn't know if any of this was realistic. 6 hours ago, I was flipping burgers and singing happy birthday. Now I was loading my family into a car with a baseball bat on the front seat, preparing to flee my home because something was happening to people, something that made them stop being people. Elena buckled Lucas into his car seat. He was asleep again, head lolled to the side, the stuffed triceratops pressed against the window. She climbed into the passenger seat and looked at me. "You know how to get to Sanford without the highway?" "Back roads. 1 south to 421, Tom sent it." "Okay." I pressed the garage door opener. The door groaned upward, revealing the driveway and beyond it, the dark geometry of our street. The streetlight at the corner had gone out. The only light came from a house 3 doors down, where every interior light blazed. Either someone was awake and terrified, or someone had left in a hurry and forgotten to turn them off. I backed out slowly. Headlights swept across the lawn, the mailbox, the sidewalk. Nothing moved. I shifted into drive and eased down Maple Street at 15 miles an hour, scanning every shadow, every hedge line, every parked car. We passed the Langford house. The front door was still open, dark inside, a shape on the porch that I refused to identify. We drove. The first 2 miles were quiet. Residential streets, all of them familiar, the route Lucas and I biked to the ice cream shop on Saturdays, the road Elena jogged every morning. In the headlights, everything looked almost normal. Parked cars, trimmed lawns, porch lights. But the stillness was total. No one walking a dog, no one sitting on a porch, no teenagers gathered under the gas station awning on the corner. Every living thing had retreated indoors or had already become something else. I turned onto Creedmoor Road, and the illusion of normalcy shattered. A delivery truck was jackknifed across both southbound lanes, its rear doors hanging open, packages scattered across the asphalt like confetti. I had to mount the curb and cut through a bank parking lot to get around it. As I did, my headlights swept the truck's cab. The driver was still in his seat, slumped against the steering wheel. Someone was in the cab with him, hunched in the passenger footwell, moving in a rhythmic, mechanical way that I will not describe because my son was 10 feet behind me. Elena saw it too. She pressed her hand against her mouth and stared straight ahead. Neither of us spoke. I called Tom as I merged back onto the road. He answered on the first ring. "Where are you?" I asked. "Just past 1010 Road. Moving steady. Roads are clear so far down here." "Where are you?" "Creedmoor, heading south. There's a jackknifed truck, some other stuff. Stay off major intersections. Cut through neighborhoods if you have to. And Mark, don't stop for anyone. I mean that. Not for anything that looks like a person in distress, not for a barricade, nothing. You stop, you die." "Copy." I hated that word. I'd never used it in my life. But it came out naturally, the way survival language does when the civilized vocabulary runs dry. The GPS wanted me on I-440. I ignored it and cut south through a residential neighborhood I didn't know, weaving through cul-de-sacs and connector streets, guided by the compass on the dashboard. Elena navigated from her phone, pinching and zooming on the map, calling out turns. Left on Weston. Right on Arbor Glen. Straight, go straight. We emerged onto Route 1 South near the Walmart. The Walmart parking lot was on fire, not the building, the lot. Cars burning in neat rows like a showroom display in hell. The orange light flickered across Elena's face as we passed, and for a moment she looked like someone I'd never met, hollowed out, aged 10 years and 2 hours. "Don't look, baby," she whispered toward the back seat, though Lucas hadn't stirred. Route 1 was mostly clear. 2 lanes, limited access. The kind of rural connector road that doesn't attract traffic even on normal nights. We passed a few cars heading north toward Raleigh, toward the chaos, and I wanted to flash my lights, to warn them. But Elena shook her head. "They wouldn't believe us. Would you have believed us 6 hours ago?" She was right. At 3 p.m., if someone had told me to flee my home because people were turning violent and inhuman, I would have offered them a burger and suggested they hydrate. We drove in silence for 20 minutes. The landscape shifted from suburban to exurban strip malls, giving way to feed stores and churches, streetlights thinning out, the sky opening up above us, huge and star-filled and indifferent. The radio offered nothing. Every station was either static or emergency broadcast tone, and that steady, buzzing drone that means the system acknowledges something is wrong, but has nothing useful to tell you about it. At the intersection of Route 1 and 421, I saw Tom's truck. He was pulled over on the shoulder, hazards on, and as I pulled in behind him, he stepped out and walked back to my window. His face was grim but controlled. Brenda was in the passenger seat, clutching a road atlas like a lifeline. "Farm's 40 minutes south," he said. "My brother-in-law Carl's already there. He's got the property secured. Fenced acreage, well water, generator." "Anyone else coming?" Tom's expression shifted. Something flickered behind his steady gaze. The Atwells were supposed to follow us, Karen and Sophie. And they never made it out of the neighborhood. Carl's farm sat at the end of a gravel road flanked by tobacco fields that hadn't been planted in years. The property was 80 acres of scrubby pasture and pine woods, bounded on 3 sides by a cattle fence, and on the 4th by a creek that ran fast and muddy from recent storms. The house was a 2-story colonial revival. White paint peeling, wrap-around porch sagging at the corners. The kind of place that looked tired in daylight, but felt like a fortress in the dark. Carl met us in the yard with a lantern and a shotgun. He was Tom's brother-in-law, Brenda's brother. A quiet man in his early 60s, with sun-cured skin and hands that had never fully healed from decades of manual work. He didn't ask questions when we pulled in. He just pointed toward the barn and said, "Park inside. Kill your lights before you reach the house." We carried Lucas in still sleeping. Elena set him on a couch in the living room and surrounded him with cushions. Professor Stomps went under his arm. She knelt beside him for a long moment, pressing her lips to his hair. And I turned away because watching her be brave was breaking something inside me that I needed intact. The house was already occupied. Carl's wife, Ruth, was in the kitchen boiling water on a propane stove. Their adult daughter, Jess, was upstairs inventorying supplies. Tom and Brenda settled into the dining room, spreading a county map across the table. That left 7 of us: me, Elena, Lucas, Tom, Brenda, Carl, Ruth, and Jess. 8, actually I'd miscounted. Jess had her 9-year-old son, Micah, asleep in one of the upstairs bedrooms. 9 people in a farmhouse at the end of the world. "Power's out countywide," Carl said, setting the lantern on the table. "Went down about an hour before you arrived. Generator's running, but I'm rationing fuel. We've got enough for maybe 10 days if we're careful. Water? Tom asked. Well, pump runs on generator. We fill every container we've got when it's running. When it's off, we've got the creek, but that needs filtering. Food? Ruth's been canning since March. We've got venison jerky, dried beans, rice, preserves. Call it 3 weeks for 9 people if we're disciplined. Elena joined the table. She'd changed into jeans and a flannel shirt she'd found somewhere. The transformation from party dress to survival gear was so complete that it felt like she'd shed a previous life at the door. Has anyone been able to reach anyone? She asked. Family, friends, anyone outside this area? Silence answered her. I got through to my sister before we left, Elena continued. Fayetteville's the same. She said. Her voice caught. She pressed her palms flat on the table and steadied herself. She said they were going to try to reach Fort Bragg. She thought the military might be organizing there. Liberty Point, Tom corrected gently. They renamed it. But yes, if any installation is operational, it would be there. It's the largest military base on the East Coast. Can we get there? I asked. That's 90 miles south, through whatever's between here and there. Tom traced the route on the map with his finger. Right now, I think we stay put. This property is defensible. The fence won't stop a determined push, but it'll slow anything down and give us warning. The creek's a natural barrier on the south side. We've got sight lines from the second floor across open pasture. How long do we stay? Elena pressed. Tom looked at Carl. Carl looked at Ruth. Ruth looked at no one. She just kept boiling water. Until we know more, Tom said. Until we understand what this is, how it spreads, whether it burns out on its own. Could be days, could be weeks, could be longer, Carl added quietly. I walked to the window and looked out at the dark pasture. The sky was clear, the Milky Way visible for the first time in years, without light pollution competing. Beautiful and useless. Somewhere in the distance, toward town, a glow pulsed against the horizon. Not sunrise, it was barely midnight. Something was burning, and it was large enough to paint the clouds. I let the curtain fall. The first night was sleepless for everyone except the children. Lucas and Micah shared the upstairs bedroom, cocooned in quilts, unaware that the world outside the walls had ruptured. The rest of us rotated through watch shifts, 2 people on the wraparound porch at all times, scanning the tree line and the gravel road with flashlights we used sparingly. My shift was 2 a.m. to 4 a.m., paired with Jess. I'd barely spoken to her before that night. She was wiry and quiet, mid-30s, with the compressed energy of someone who had learned to survive difficult things long before zombies became a variable. She'd raised Micah alone since he was 2. She didn't volunteer that information Ruth told me while we were organizing the kitchen. Jess doesn't talk about what's hard, Ruth said. She just handles it. On the porch, Jess sat in a rocking chair with a hunting rifle across her knees. She handled it with the ease of someone who'd grown up with firearms as tools, not symbols. I sat in the chair beside her with a baseball bat and felt inadequate. You ever fired a gun? She asked, 20 minutes into our shift. Twice. Skeet shooting at a bachelor party. We'll fix that tomorrow. Carl's got a .22 that's practically a toy. Good for learning. You think we'll need to shoot? Jess looked at me with an expression that wasn't unkind, but was entirely free of illusion. I think the world ended tonight, Mark. So yeah, we'll need to shoot. We sat in silence after that, listening. The farm had its own soundtrack: crickets, frogs in the creek, the occasional rustle of something moving through the pasture that was probably a deer. Probably. Every sound registered differently now. Every snap of a twig carried lethal potential. At 3:17 a.m., we heard a car. Distant at first, then growing an engine laboring hard, tires crunching gravel. Headlights appeared at the far end of the access road, bouncing through the potholes, and Jess was on her feet with the rifle shouldered before I'd even processed what was happening. "One vehicle," she said, "moving fast, too fast for that road." The car, a sedan, dark-colored, I couldn't tell the make, reached the main gate and skidded to a stop. The horn blared. 3 short bursts. Tom appeared on the porch behind us, fully dressed, a pistol in his hand. "Nobody move until we identify." The driver's door opened. A man stumbled out, backlit by his own headlights. He was holding someone, a child, limp in his arms. "Please." The voice carried across the yard, ragged and desperate. "Please, we need help. My daughter, she's been bitten. She's burning up, please." Tom stepped forward. "Who are you?" "My name is David Osei. I live on Timber Drive in Holly Springs. We've been driving for 2 hours. Every hospital is gone, every clinic. Please, she's 8 years old." Jess lowered her rifle an inch. I could see her calculating the math of mercy versus risk, the equation that the old world never asked you to solve. "Bitten," Tom repeated. "By what?" "By our neighbor. He came into our yard. He wasn't himself. He grabbed Maya before I could—" David's voice broke. He adjusted the child in his arms. She was motionless. "She could be turning," Tom said quietly. "To us, not to David. If the bite transmits whatever this is." "She's 8, I said. "I know how old she is." "She's 8 years old, Tom." Elena appeared in the doorway. She'd heard everything. She looked at the man in the headlights holding his daughter. And then she looked at me. And something passed between us that didn't require words. It was a shared understanding that whatever we were becoming in this new world, we were not yet the kind of people who turned away a father carrying his dying child in the dark. "Bring her inside," Elena said. "Bring her to the kitchen." Tom exhaled through his nose. Jess lowered the rifle completely. David Osei walked toward the house. Maya Osei was 8 years old, 42 pounds, and burning with a fever of 104.2. Elena took her temperature with the digital thermometer from our first aid kit, while Ruth cleared the kitchen table and Jess brought clean towels. The bite was on her left forearm. 2 crescents of puncture wounds, swollen and red, weeping a fluid that was neither blood nor pus, but something between, thin and faintly iridescent in the lantern light. David stood in the corner, shaking, not from cold. His shirt was torn at the collar, and there was dried blood on his hands. His daughter's, I assumed, or maybe his neighbor's. He was a lean man, early 40s, with close cropped hair and wire-rimmed glasses that sat crooked on his face. An accountant, I'd learn later. A man whose biggest daily risk had been a long commute on I-540. "When was she bitten?" Elena asked. "Around 9, maybe 9:30. I'm not sure. Everything happened so fast." 6 hours ago. If the infection, if that's what it was, had a timeline, we were deep into it. "Has she been conscious since?" "In and out. She was talking in the car, but not making sense. Asking for her mother." He swallowed. "Her mother's in Charlotte. We're separated. I've been trying to reach her all night." Ruth brought a bowl of cool water and a cloth. Elena bathed Maya's forehead while the girl murmured and twitched. Her eyes were open but unfocused, tracking things that weren't in the room. Tom pulled me into the hallway. Carl followed. "This is a problem," Tom said. his voice barely above a whisper. We don't know what we're dealing with. If that bite is transmitting a pathogen, viral, bacterial, parasitic, whatever, we've just brought it into the house where our children are sleeping. What do you want me to say, Tom? She's a kid. I want you to say you understand the risk, that you've waited. I've waited. And I'd rather live with the guilt of being wrong than the certainty of leaving an 8-year-old to die in a car. Carl spoke for the first time. We isolate her. The old dairy shed out past the barn. It's got a concrete floor, a door that locks from outside. We set up a cot, keep her comfortable, but separate from the house. Tom nodded slowly. That's reasonable. David can stay with her. David stays in the house, I said. He's a father. He needs sleep. He needs food. He's no good to his daughter if he collapses. Then we rotate checks on her every hour. Fine. We moved Maya to the dairy shed. It was a grim space, cold concrete, a single window, shelves lined with rusted milk pails. But Ruth transformed it with quilts and a kerosene heater and a battery-powered lantern that cast warm amber light. David laid his daughter on the cot and arranged the blankets with a tenderness that made me look away. I'll stay with her, he said. You need to rest. I'll stay with her. Not aggressive, not hysterical, just immovable. The bedrock stubbornness of a parent who will not be separated from a suffering child by any force less than death. I left him there, walked back to the house. Elena was washing her hands at the kitchen sink, methodical, surgical, the way Karen Atwell had probably washed hers 1,000 times at Wake Med. Karen, who never made it out of the neighborhood. Karen and Sophie. I wondered if Sophie had been wearing the birthday crown Lucas had given her, the extra one Elena made, just in case. You did the right thing, I told Elena. She turned off the water and dried her hands. I know, but Tom's not wrong either. If that little girl turns, if whatever happened to those people on our street is happening inside her right now, we've put everyone at risk. What would you have done differently? Elena folded the towel precisely, set it on the counter, aligned the edges. Nothing, she said. That's the problem. Every right answer tonight is also a wrong one. We're in the space where those overlap. She went upstairs. I sat at the kitchen table in the dark, listening to the generator hum, waiting for a sound from the dairy shed that I prayed wouldn't come. Dawn arrived without fanfare, a slow gray brightening that revealed the farm in full daylight for the first time. The property was both better and worse than it had seemed in the dark. Better because the sight lines were excellent. From the second-floor windows, you could see across open pasture for nearly a quarter mile in 3 directions, and the tree line that bordered the north side was thin enough to spot movement through. Worse because the fence, the one Tom had called a natural barrier, was cattle wire, sagging in places, propped up with rotting posts. It would stop a cow. It would slow nothing that intended to get through. Carl and I walked the perimeter at first light while the others slept. He carried his shotgun loose at his side and moved with the unhurried confidence of someone who'd walked this land 10,000 times. I carried the .22 Jess had given me, its weight foreign and uncomfortable against my shoulder. How long have you been out here? I asked. 31 years. Ruth and I moved in the year after we married. Raised Jess and her brother here. He's in Oregon. Haven't been able to reach him. I'm sorry. Carl shrugged not dismissively, but with the practiced acceptance of a man who had lived close to the cycles of growth and death his entire life. A lot of people can't be reached right now. Doesn't mean they're gone. Just means the lines are down. We reached the creek. It was swollen from summer storms, moving fast, maybe 15 feet across. On the far bank, the woods were dense pine and oak and undergrowth thick enough to hide a regiment. Anything comes from that direction, we won't see it until it's at the water, Carl said. That's our weak point. Can we block it? With what? I've got fence wire and an old tractor. We're not building a dam. What about noise? Tripwire with cans? Carl looked at me with faint surprise. That's not a bad idea. I've got wire in the barn. We'll do that today. We walked back in silence. As we neared the dairy shed, I hesitated. I should check on her, I said. Carl nodded. I'll wait. I opened the shed door. David was asleep in a chair beside the cot, his head resting on his daughter's pillow, one hand wrapped around her small fingers. Maya was awake. Her eyes were open and clear, and she was staring at the ceiling with the peculiar stillness of a child trying to understand something too large for her mind. Hi, I said softly. She turned her head. Where's my dad? Right here. He's sleeping. Is this a farm? Yes. Are there animals? I think there might be some chickens somewhere. The ghost of a smile. I like chickens. Her fever had broken, I could tell without touching her. The sheen of sweat was gone. Her skin had returned to its natural dark brown, no longer flushed with the mottled red of the night before. The bite on her arm was still swollen, but the angry redness had receded, replaced by a bruised purple that suggested healing rather than infection. I reported this to Elena and Tom over breakfast. Tom's reaction was cautious. Fevers break and come back. We keep her isolated another 24 hours minimum. Agreed, Elena said. But this is a good sign. If the infection turned people in hours, and from what we saw, it did, then Maya's body might be fighting it off. Or she might be on a different timeline, Tom countered. Or that, Elena conceded. Micah and Lucas appeared at the top of the stairs, drawn by the smell of Ruth's cornbread. Lucas was carrying Professor Stomp's, his paper crown somehow still perched on his head from the night before, bent and creased, but present. Daddy, where are we? A friend's farm. Remember I said adventure trip? Is this the adventure? I pulled him onto my lap and held him tighter than I meant to. He squirmed but didn't complain. Yeah, buddy, this is the adventure. He accepted this with the terrifying faith of a child who believes his parents can keep the world intact simply by being in it. By midday, we'd established a rhythm. Carl and Tom handled perimeter security, reinforcing the fence where they could, stringing trip wire along the creek bank, clearing brush from the sight lines. Jess taught me to shoot behind the barn, using tin cans on fence posts, and I discovered that my hand steadied faster than I expected. The .22 was light, its report almost modest, and by the 20th round, I was hitting the cans more than missing them. You won't freeze, Jess said, watching me reload. Some people do. They see a threat and their hands stop working. You won't, I can tell. How? Because you're angry, not scared. Angry people shoot. Scared people don't. She was right about the anger. It had been building since we left Maple Street, a slow, tectonic pressure beneath the fear, the grief, the disbelief. Anger at the randomness of it. Anger at whatever biological mechanism had turned my neighbors into predators. Anger at myself for not acting sooner. For standing at the grill, flipping burgers while the world was already ending, separated from catastrophe by nothing more than a backyard fence and a child's birthday song. Elena spent the morning with David and Maya. She'd appointed herself the girl's caretaker, changing bandages, monitoring her temperature, reading to her from an old almanac she'd found on Carl's shelf. When I checked in at noon, Maya was sitting up, drinking broth, asking David when they could go home. "Soon, baby," David said. And the lie was so practiced that I knew he'd been telling her versions of it all morning. In the kitchen, Ruth inventoried food with military precision. She'd laid everything out on the counters. Mason jars of preserved tomatoes, green beans, peach preserves, bags of rice and dried pinto beans, venison jerky in vacuum-sealed packs, canned tuna, canned corn, canned pears, a 5-pound bag of flour, and a tin of baking powder. 22 days, she announced, for 9 adults and 2 children. Longer if we cut to 2 meals. "What about the garden?" Brenda asked. She'd been quiet since our arrival, processing in her own interior way, but now she stood at the window, overlooking a neglected plot beside the barn. "Hasn't been planted this season," Ruth said. "But the soil's good. If we had seed—" "I have seed," Brenda said. Everyone looked at her. She opened her handbag, the enormous leather tote she carried everywhere, and produced 4 packets of vegetable seeds: tomato, zucchini, basil, lettuce. "I was going to start a window garden. I bought these last week." It was such a small thing, 4 paper packets. But Ruth took them like they were documents of surrender from an enemy nation. "Bless you," Ruth said, and meant it. By afternoon, the tripwire was strung, the fence was patched, the garden plot was turned, and the children were playing in the yard under Jess's watchful eye. Lucas and Micah had found Carl's old tire swing and were taking turns pushing each other, their laughter crossing the pasture in bright, defiant arcs. I stood on the porch watching them and felt 2 things simultaneously: gratitude that they could still laugh, and terror that the sound might carry to something listening. Tom joined me. He'd been monitoring the radio all morning, a hand-cranked emergency unit that pulled in fragments of signal between bursts of static. "Anything?" I asked. "FEMA broadcast on loop. Shelter in place. Avoid contact with infected individuals. Military operations underway. Same thing every 15 minutes. No specifics, no timeline." "So they're alive." "Someone's alive enough to press play on a recording. That's all I know." We watched the children play. The sun was warm. The sky was clear. If you ignored the smoke still visible on the northern horizon, if you tuned out the absence of aircraft overhead, if you forgot that every phone in the house had been dead since 4 a.m., you could almost pretend this was just a Sunday afternoon at a relative's farm. Almost. Tom shifted beside me. "Something else. Just before dawn, I saw movement at the tree line. North side. 2 figures, maybe 3. My stomach dropped. "Did they approach?" "No, they watched. Then they left. But Mark, they weren't infected. They were moving normally, walking upright, coordinated." "Survivors?" "Maybe, or maybe something worse." The figures returned that evening. This time, there were 5 of them, standing just inside the tree line on the north side, visible from the second-floor window as silhouettes against the dimming sky. They stood in a loose group, not moving, not approaching, watching. Tom, Carl, and I observed them from Jess's bedroom window. The distance was roughly 200 yards, close enough to confirm they were human, too far to make out faces or clothing details. "They're scouting," Tom said, "assessing the property, counting heads." "Or they're scared and looking for safety," I offered. "If they wanted safety, they'd approach. They'd call out. They wouldn't stand in the shadows." Carl chambered around in his shotgun, with a sound that felt like punctuation. "I'm going to talk to them," I said. "No." "Carl, they might be families. They might have children." They might have guns. So do we. Which is exactly why we don't walk toward unknown armed groups in the dark. I turned to Tom for the tiebreaker. He was studying the figures through a pair of binoculars Carl had brought from the hall closet. One of them has a backpack, Tom said. Another one's carrying something long, could be a rifle, could be a pipe. Hard to tell. He lowered the binoculars. We wait. If they're friendly, morning will prove it. If they're not, we'll know that too. We set double watches that night. I partnered with David, who'd been pacing the house since sunset with the restless energy of a man whose only child was sleeping in an outbuilding 40 yards from strangers in the woods. I should be with Maya, he said for the third time. Maya's safer in the shed than anywhere else right now. It's away from the house, away from the road, tucked behind the barn. If something happens, Elena will get to her. Elena's not her parent. No, but she's the closest thing to a doctor we have, and she's sleeping in the barn tonight specifically to be near your daughter. Let her do this, David. He stopped pacing, sat down on the porch steps, removed his glasses and cleaned them on his shirt, a habit, I suspected, that predated the apocalypse by decades. I'm an accountant, he said. I know. I moved numbers around spreadsheets for a living. I balanced columns. I reconciled quarterly reports. And now I'm on a farm with strangers, holding a kitchen knife because there's no gun left for me. And my daughter is recovering from a bite inflicted by a man I used to borrow lawn tools from. Howard Chen. David looked at me sharply. How did you know? You said Timber Drive, Holly Springs. I've got a colleague who lives on that street. He mentioned his neighbor Howard, said he was the friendliest guy on the block. He was. He brought us soup when Maya had the flu in February. Homemade egg drop soup in a porcelain bowl with a lid. He asked for the bowl back 2 days later, very politely. David put his glasses on. He didn't ask politely when he came through our screen door Saturday evening. We sat in silence. The night was cooler than the previous one, a front moving through, dropping the temperature, bringing a breeze that smelled of pine, and beneath it, something acrid. Distant fire. At 1 a.m., Jess came to relieve David. As he walked inside, she took his seat and produced a thermos of coffee. Ruth's Miracle Brew, she said, pouring me a cup. Half coffee, half chicory root. Tastes like a tire, but it works. Thanks. The figures in the trees are gone, she said. You checked. Binoculars from the upstairs bathroom. North tree line is clear. She sipped her coffee. But there are tire tracks on the access road that weren't there this morning. Someone drove up, turned around, and drove away. Recently, the dust hasn't settled. Scouting. Scouting, she confirmed. The coffee was terrible and essential. I drank it in 3 gulps and felt my heartbeat accelerate. Though whether that was caffeine or fear, I couldn't distinguish. Jess, what do we do if they come back and they're not friendly? She looked at the dark tree line. Her answer was measured. Then we find out what we're willing to do to keep our children alive. They came back on the 3rd morning. Not at the tree line, at the front gate, in broad daylight, in a convoy of 3 vehicles. 2 pickup trucks and an SUV, all coated in road dust, all carrying people in the beds and on the running boards. I counted 14, armed, organized, led by a tall woman in a canvas jacket who stepped out of the lead truck with the posture of someone who expected compliance. Her name was Arden Price. She told us this from the gate, hands visible, her voice carrying across the 60 yards between us. I'm not here to fight, she called. I'm here to consolidate. There are 200 infected between here and Sanford. We've been clearing roads for 3 days. We need water and a place to rest." Tom was beside me, rifle lowered but ready. Carl flanked the porch with his shotgun. Jess was upstairs at the window with a scoped hunting rifle, covering the approach. "How did you find this place?" Tom asked. "Scouted it 2 nights ago. Saw your lights, watched your routine. You've got fence, water, structure. Better than anything between here and the county line. So you were the figures in the trees?" "Yes." "And the tire tracks?" "Also, yes." The honesty was disarming. Arden Price could have lied, could have claimed coincidence, arrived under a different pretense. Instead, she stood in the open with her cards on the table and waited. Tom looked at me. I looked at Carl. "How many of your people are injured?" I asked. 3. One with a broken wrist, one dehydrated, one with a bite on her ankle that she got 48 hours ago. She hasn't turned. "We've got one like that too," I said. 8-year-old girl, bitten 3 days ago. Fever broke on the 2nd day. She's recovering. Something shifted in Arden's expression. Interest, and behind it, something that might have been hope. "Can I see her?" "Why?" "Because if people can survive bites, that changes everything." We let them in. It was not a unanimous decision. Carl voted no. Tom voted conditional yes. Jess abstained. Elena, David, Ruth, Brenda, and I voted yes. The math carried, but the tension didn't resolve, it merely changed shape, becoming internal rather than external. A fault line running through our group instead of around it. Arden's people set up camp in the pasture east of the barn. They were a mixed group, families, couples, loners. A retired firefighter named Wallace who'd driven 60 miles on back roads with his 2 grandchildren in the back seat. A young couple, Kira and James, who'd been camping in the Uvari forest when the outbreak reached the trailhead. A paramedic named Santos, who immediately partnered with Elena to treat the wounded. The woman with the ankle bite was named Dara. She was 41, a yoga instructor from Holly Springs, the same Holly Springs David had fled, and her bite wound looked similar to Maya's. Swollen, bruised, but showing signs of healing rather than corruption. Santos examined both Dara and Maya and arrived at a theory. "Blood type," he said, laying out his findings at a meeting that evening. "Maya is O negative. Dara is O negative. Both survived bites that should have turned them. I'm not a virologist, but there's precedent for blood type resistance in other pathogens: cholera, malaria, plague." "You're saying their blood type is protecting them?" Elena asked. "I'm saying it's a correlation. 2 data points isn't a study, but it's enough to pay attention to." "Does anyone else here know their blood type?" I asked. Most did. The room was a mix of A positive, B positive, O positive. Only David shared his daughter's O negative. "If Santos is right," Arden said, leaning against the kitchen wall, "then O negative survivors aren't just immune. They're the most valuable resource on Earth. A possible vector for treatment, maybe even a cure." The room absorbed this. The weight of it settled on David's shoulders visibly. He looked at his sleeping daughter through the kitchen window, toward the dairy shed, and I watched him realize that Maya had gone from victim to commodity in the space of a single sentence. "Nobody touches my daughter," he said, and the softness in his voice made it more threatening than any shout. The uneasy alliance held for 5 days. Arden was efficient, experienced, and ruthlessly practical. She organized her people into work crews, fence repair, water hauling, perimeter patrol, and they integrated with our group in a way that multiplied our capacity without dissolving our identity. The farm, which had felt like a fragile refuge a week ago, began to resemble something more permanent. more structured, more like a settlement. But structure breeds hierarchy, and hierarchy breeds conflict. The first fracture appeared over the generator. Carl rationed fuel according to his original calculation. Lights and water pump for 3 hours a day, morning and evening. Arden argued for 6 hours her people needed to charge medical equipment Santos had salvaged from an abandoned clinic, including a battery-powered centrifuge he believed could be used to analyze Maya's and Dara's blood. Every hour of generator time costs us a day of fuel reserves, Carl said. Every day without analysis costs us the chance to understand this thing, Arden countered. They argued in the kitchen while Ruth silently peeled potatoes, and I stood in the doorway feeling the gravitational pull of two reasonable positions moving toward collision. Tom mediated. A compromise was reached. 4 hours of generator time, the extra hour dedicated to Santos's work. Carl agreed with his mouth. His eyes said something different. The second fracture was personal. Elena had been spending increasing time in the dairy shed with Maya changing bandages, monitoring vitals, reading to her from books Jess had found in the attic. David appreciated it. But Arden began requesting Elena's presence at medical briefings, strategy sessions, supply assessments. Elena was the most organized person on the farm, and Arden recognized that immediately. "I need her on the logistics team," Arden told me one evening, as if Elena's allocation were my decision. "Talk to her yourself. She makes her own choices." "I have. She said she needs to stay with Maya." "Then there's your answer. The girl is recovering. She doesn't need a full-time nurse. What she needs is someone to analyze her blood. And what we all need is someone who can manage supply chains for 23 people. 23. The population had grown. A family of 4 had arrived the previous night, the Wongs, from Apex, who'd spent 2 days hiding in a church basement before deciding to head south. Arden had welcomed them at the gate with the same calm authority she'd shown us. I found Elena in the shed that evening. Maya was asleep. Dara was sitting on the floor, cross-legged, doing breathing exercises, with the serene focus of someone who had decided that inner peace was the only territory left to defend. "Arden wants me on logistics," Elena said, not looking up from the supply list she was writing. I heard. She's not wrong. Ruth can't manage food distribution for this many people alone, and nobody else is stepping up. But I promised David I'd take care of Maya. Maya's getting better. She ate solid food today. Elena set down her pen. It's not about the medicine anymore. Mark, that girl is terrified. She cries in her sleep. She asks for her mother every morning. I'm not treating a wound, I'm holding a child together. I sat down beside her on the concrete floor. The shed smelled of kerosene and old milk and the lavender oil Ruth had contributed from her personal supply. Maya's chest rose and fell steadily, her face peaceful in sleep. Professor Stomp's, which Lucas had donated with grave ceremony, tucked under her arm. You can do both, I said. I can do both badly. Then do both badly. That's what the rest of us are doing. Tom's both a soldier and a grandfather, pretending to be calm. Carl's both a farmer and a commander, pretending to know strategy. Jess is both a single mom and a marksman, pretending she isn't scared. We're all holding two things that don't fit together. You can too. Elena leaned her head against my shoulder. It was the first moment of stillness between us since the birthday party, the first time we touched without urgency, without information to exchange, without a crisis pulling us apart. I miss our house, she whispered. Me too. Lucas asked me today when we're going home. What did you tell him? Same thing David tells Maya. Soon, on the 9th day, the infected reached the farm. We'd been lucky geographically, temporally, strategically. The farm's isolation, the swollen creek, the open sight lines had created a buffer that bought us time. But time runs out. It always runs out. Jess spotted them first from the upstairs window during the pre-dawn watch. A group of 7 emerging from the south tree line across the creek. They moved in the same flat-footed mechanical gait I'd seen on Maple Street, forward locked, arms still, heads fixed. But something was different. These were faster, leaner, as if the early-stage stiffness had burned away, leaving behind a stripped-down efficiency of movement that was less human and more predatory. She fired a signal shot, 1 round into the air, and the farm woke in 90 seconds. Arden's people were first to the perimeter, organized by weeks of drill. Tom and Carl took the porch. I positioned at the east window with the .22, my hands steady, my breathing controlled, the way Jess had taught me. The infected reached the creek and paused. They stood at the water's edge, heads tilting, as if processing the obstacle. Then, in unison, they entered the water. No hesitation, no testing the depth. They walked in, and the current took the 2 smallest, dragging them downstream. But the remaining 5 powered through with a focus that was absolute and horrifying. The tripwire cans erupted on the far bank, a cacophony of tin on tin that sang across the pasture and brought everyone to full alert. "Hold fire until they're at the fence," Tom ordered. "Conserve ammunition." The 5 emerged from the creek, streaming water, and crossed the open ground between the bank and the cattle fence at a pace that closed 200 yards in under a minute. They hit the wire, and the first 2 tangled legs catching, bodies pitching forward, but the 3rd and 4th climbed over them, using the fallen as stepping stones. And the 5th tore through a gap where the wire had been patched with nothing more than baling twine. Jess's rifle cracked from upstairs. 1 dropped, then another. Clean shots, center mass, and they didn't get back up. The 3 remaining crossed the pasture toward the house. I fired from the window and missed. Fired again and hit one in the shoulder. It spun, but didn't fall. Corrected course and kept coming. Carl's shotgun boomed from the porch. 2 loads of buckshot at 30 yards. One went down permanently. The other absorbed the impact, staggered, and lunged up the porch steps. Tom shot it in the head at a distance of 4 feet. The last one had circled around the barn. Wallace, the retired firefighter, intercepted it with a shovel, a single overhead swing that connected with the base of its skull and produced a sound I will carry for the rest of my life. The thing collapsed at his feet and didn't move. 7 infected, 5 rounds of rifle ammunition expended, 3 shotgun shells, 4.22 rounds, 1 shovel, 0 casualties on our side. It should have felt like a victory. Instead, it felt like a preview. 7 is a scouting party, Tom said, as we stood in the pasture looking at the bodies. A vanguard. If there are 200 between here and Sanford, like Arden said, some percentage of them will follow the same path these did. Creek funnels them towards us. It's a barrier, but it's also a highway. How long? Arden asked. Days, maybe less. Depends on what's driving them. If they're moving randomly, we could get lucky. If they're tracking something sound, heat, smell, then our settlement is a beacon. Elena stood at the edge of the group, arms folded. Then we need to decide. Do we fortify and hold, or do we move? Move where? Carl asked, and the bitterness in his voice was the sound of a man being asked to abandon his home for the second time in a lifetime. The first being the evening we arrived, and his quiet life ended. Fort Liberty, Tom said. 90 miles. 3 days on foot if we're lucky. On foot? With children? With children. With wounded. With everything we can carry. The group fell silent. And in that silence, I heard Lucas's voice drifting from the house. He was singing the Professor Stomp song, the one about going to space. We left on the morning of the 11th day. 23 people, 4 vehicles, and whatever we could pack into them. The argument over staying versus leaving had consumed 2 days and nearly fractured the group permanently. Carl refused to go. Ruth stayed with him. This was not capitulation. It was choice, conscious and clear-eyed. Carl stood on his porch and watched us load the trucks and said, "This land's been mine for 30 years. Whatever comes through that tree line, it'll find me here." I shook his hand. Elena hugged Ruth. Tom and Carl exchanged a look that contained an entire vocabulary of respect, gratitude, and farewell that neither would have been comfortable expressing in words. Jess loaded Micah into Arden's SUV without looking back at the house. I thought that was cold until I saw her hands gripping the steering wheel, white-knuckled, trembling, and understood she wasn't avoiding grief. She was containing it. The convoy order was Tom's truck leading, Arden's SUV second, David's sedan third with Maya in the back seat, and my SUV bringing up the rear. The plan was Route 421 south to Fort Liberty, staying off major roads, moving in daylight, stopping before dark. The first hour was uneventful. The back roads south of the farm wound through agricultural land, soybean fields, tobacco, the occasional farmstead. Some houses showed signs of life. Curtains moving, smoke from chimneys, a face at a window watching our convoy pass. Others were obviously abandoned, doors open, cars gone, the particular stillness of a place where living things used to be. We passed our first cluster of infected just past the Lee County line. A group of 12, moving across an open field parallel to the road, heading east. They didn't react to our vehicles, didn't turn, didn't pursue. They moved with that terrible mechanical focus, oriented towards something beyond us. And for the first time, I wondered if they had a destination, if whatever drove them was not random but purposeful. A migration pattern etched into corrupted neurology. "They're heading toward Sanford," Tom said over the radio. "Population center. Makes sense if they're attracted to density." "Or to sound," Arden added. "The FEMA broadcast station is east of Sanford. If they can detect radio frequencies..." "Let's not speculate on capabilities we can't confirm," Tom cut in. "Focus on the road." We drove. Lucas sat in his car seat, watching the landscape pass with wide eyes that had stopped asking questions. He held Professor Stomps against the window and occasionally narrated the view in a whisper. "There's a tractor, Stomps. There's a big tree. There's a house with no door." He'd accepted our situation the way children accept weather. Not as a crisis to be analyzed, but as conditions to be endured. Elena rode shotgun with the map and the .22 across her lap. She'd become a different person in 11 days. Not harder exactly, but more condensed. Every gesture was intentional. Every word carried weight. The woman who'd spent 2 nights sculpting a fondant brontosaurus had become a person who could read a topographic map, dress a wound, and field strip a rifle. The road narrowed as we crossed into Harnett County. Pine forests pressed in from both sides, reducing visibility and multiplying anxiety. I tightened my grip on the wheel. "Contact ahead," Tom's voice crackled on the radio. I slowed. Through the windshield, past the 2 vehicles ahead of me, I could see the road blocked. Not by infected by people, living people, standing across the road with a barricade of felled trees and overturned furniture. 6 of them, all armed. A man stepped forward and raised his hand. Not a wave, a command to stop. Tom's truck halted. Then Arden's, then David's, then mine. The man approached Tom's window. I couldn't hear the conversation from 4 vehicles back, but I could see Tom's posture rigid, controlled, his hand resting on the rifle between the seats. After 3 minutes, Tom keyed the radio. They want a toll, fuel, food, and ammunition. They say it's the price of using the road. And if we refuse? Arden asked. The radio went silent for a beat too long. He says they'll take the vehicles instead. What followed was the longest 15 minutes of my life. Tom negotiated from his truck while Arden quietly organized our response over a secondary radio channel. Jess, positioned in the back of Arden's SUV with a scoped rifle, had a clear line on the barricade leader. Wallace and Santos had moved to the shoulders of the road, flanking our convoy, staying low behind the vehicles. I can give you 2 cans of fuel and a case of canned goods, Tom offered through his window. That's not enough, the barricade leader said. He was young, late 20s, unshaven, wearing a hunting vest and carrying an AR-15, with the casual familiarity of someone who'd owned it long before the world ended. His people were less polished, nervous, scanning the tree line, shifting weight from foot to foot. Amateurs with weapons, the most dangerous kind. It's what we have to spare. Then spare more. We've been out here for 9 days. We haven't eaten properly in 3. You've got 4 vehicles loaded with supplies heading south toward what? Fort Liberty? It's gone. Overrun on the 2nd day. We've got people who were there who saw it fall. The radio channel erupted. Is he telling the truth? Elena asked. No way to verify, Arden replied. Could be a negotiation tactic. Could be the truth, David countered. Tom's voice was steady. Even if it is, we have to keep moving. Standing still is dying. Not if there's nothing to move toward, the barricade leader called out, apparently hearing the radio bleed. I'm trying to do you a favor. South is death. Stay here, join us, and we combine resources. That's not a toll, I said, keying into the channel. That's a recruitment pitch. Call it what you want. The math is the same. I got out of my SUV. Elena grabbed my arm. Don't. I need to see his face. I walked forward along the convoy, past David's sedan, where Maya watched through the window with round, solemn eyes. Past Arden's SUV, where Jess tracked me through her scope. Past Tom's truck, where the engine still idled. I stopped 10 feet from the barricade leader. He was young, tired. His vest hung loose on a frame that had been heavier 2 weeks ago. The AR-15 was clean, which meant he maintained it, which meant he was disciplined. The people behind him were less so. I could see fear in their posture, in the way they gripped their weapons too tightly, in the way one woman at the back kept glancing over her shoulder. What's your name? I asked. Why? Because I'm standing in front of your gun with my family behind me, and I'd like to know who I'm talking to. A pause. Mitchell. Kyle Mitchell. Kyle, I've got a 7-year-old son in that last vehicle. He's had the worst 2 weeks of his life, and he still thinks this is an adventure because his parents haven't told him otherwise. I've got a man whose 8-year-old daughter survived a bite that should have killed her. I've got a former soldier, a paramedic, a markswoman, and 23 people who've agreed to trust each other because the alternative is dying alone. That's a nice speech. It's not a speech. It's an inventory. And here's what's not in it. The willingness to give up our vehicles, our food, or our chance at reaching safety because 6 scared people built a roadblock. Kyle Mitchell studied me. Behind him, the woman at the back shifted again. One of the men lowered his weapon slightly, not a surrender, but a softening. Fort Liberty is gone, Kyle said again, quieter now. Maybe, but we've got something you don't. We've got 2 people who survived bites. A paramedic who thinks he knows why. If there's a military installation, a research facility, anyone left who's working on this, they need what we have. And that means we need to keep moving. Kyle looked at his people. The woman at the back met his eyes and shook her head not in defiance, but in exhaustion. She was done with the roadblock, done with the posture of power that had no substance behind it. Take the road, Kyle said, but leave the fuel, 2 cans. One. He stepped aside. His people followed. We drove through. Kyle Mitchell was right about Fort Liberty. We found out 60 miles later, when the smoke became visible above the tree line. Not the thin domestic smoke of cooking fires, but a massive industrial pall that hung across the southern sky like a bruise on the atmosphere. The military installation was burning. Had been burning for days, judging by the layer of ash that coated the road's surface as we approached. We stopped 3 miles north of the base perimeter. Through binoculars, Tom confirmed what Kyle had claimed. The fences were breached in multiple places, the guard towers were empty, and the roads leading in were choked with abandoned military vehicles, Humvees, transport trucks, a medical helicopter on its side in a parking lot. Rotors bent like broken fingers. Nobody spoke for a long time. Then Arden said, "There'll be supplies in there. Medical, ammunition, food, even overrun. A military base has resources. It also has thousands of infected military personnel who are among the best trained physical specimens in the country," Tom said. "I'm not walking into that." Then where? The question hung in the ash-filtered air. 23 people standing on a road that led to a burning fortress, with no destination, diminishing fuel, and children who hadn't eaten since morning. Elena unfolded the map on the hood of my SUV. She'd been studying it for days, marking water sources, noting terrain features, circling anything that might offer shelter or advantage. Her finger traced south, past Fort Liberty, past Fayetteville, down toward the coast. "There," she said, "Fort Fisher, at the mouth of the Cape Fear River. It's a state historic site, small, defensible, surrounded by water on 3 sides. The coast offers fishing, sea salt, tidal marshes for concealment. And if there are Navy assets still operational offshore." "That's another 100 miles, David said. "Through mostly rural terrain," Elena countered. "Low population density, fewer infected. The Bladen County Forest provides cover and game." Tom studied the map. His finger followed Elena's route, tapping at intervals, water crossings, intersections, potential choke points. "It's not bad," he said. And from Tom, that was a coronation. "It's 3 more days at minimum," Arden said. "Our fuel won't last." "Then we siphon from the abandoned vehicles on the base perimeter," Jess offered. "I'll take Santos and Wallace, in and out, 30 minutes. The scavenging run took 47 minutes and produced 18 gallons of diesel and 12 of gasoline, plus 3 cases of MREs, a field medical kit, and a crate of bottled water. Jess also returned with something she didn't show the group, a folded document she slipped to Tom, who read it with an expression I hadn't seen on his face before, something between vindication and sorrow. Later, he told me what it said. It was a field order, dated 2 days after the outbreak began, stamped classified, but left behind in the chaos of evacuation. The language was terse and military, but the meaning was clear. The pathogen was confirmed airborne in trace amounts. Everyone had been exposed. But infection full conversion required direct fluid transfer. A bite, an open wound, contaminated blood. The airborne component was dormant in most carriers, suppressed by normal immune function. But in O-negative blood types, the dormant component was actively destroyed by immune response, rendering them fully resistant. Santos had been right. Maya and Dara weren't lucky. They were the answer. "We need to get them to someone who can use this information," Tom said. "A lab, a hospital, a functioning research facility. Somewhere." "Fort Fisher," Elena said. "If the Navy's offshore, they'll have medical facilities. Floating hospitals. We get to the coast. We find a way to signal them." It was a plan built on hope and geography and the desperate math of survival. But it was a plan, and a plan is the difference between migration and flight. We redistributed fuel, repacked the vehicles, and pointed south. Lucas was asleep in his car seat, Professor Stomps wedged between his cheek and the headrest, his paper crown finally gone lost somewhere between the farm and the future. I mourned that crown more than I'd mourned anything else. It was the last artifact of the world before. Elena reached over and squeezed my hand. "Drive," she said. I drove. We reached the coast on a Wednesday. I know because Elena had been marking days on the map margin, small, precise hash marks that she added each sunrise like a prayer. 14 marks. 2 weeks since blue frosting and candles and a paper crown. Fort Fisher was empty, but intact. The old Civil War earthworks provided elevation and sight lines. The river mouth spread before us, gray and vast. And on the second morning, Jess spotted a ship on the horizon, navy gray, antennae bristling, moving slowly south. Santos rigged a signal fire on the beach using diesel and driftwood. Arden organized the survivors into a visible formation, 27 now, with 4 more we'd collected along the route. Maya stood in front, healthy, fierce, her small hand gripping her father's. The ship turned toward us. It took 3 hours. When the launch boat reached the shore, a medic stepped out and asked if we had wounded. "We have something better," Elena said. "We have resistant survivors. 2 confirmed O-negative carriers with full immune suppression of the pathogen." The medic radioed the ship. The response was immediate. They took us aboard. Lucas looked up at me as we stepped onto the deck. "Is the adventure over, Daddy?" I knelt beside him. "This part is." He nodded, satisfied, and asked if the ship had chickens.